I think we better get started here. We have Jim Paquette here, and I don't know if that's Jim or if that's Jim, but he's on the screen right
Depends what day it's, whatever day, it could be both.
I'm sure you all know a little bit about Jim and what he's done. It's something anybody could have done, stumble onto something. Mm-hmm. But what he did, he carried it through. That's the marvelous part about it. And he wrote it up, he got help, and it all turned out well. I'm proud to see people do that. It's wonderful. So, here's Jim.
Okay.
You don't need help, do you?
No, I think I'm pretty good here. So if I lower this and somebody holler at me and wave their arms if you can't hear me. One of the things before I get started here, I know there's some people that stepped out and are working their way back in. But what I'm going to be showing today in this presentation, a lot of what I'm going to be showing are never before seen documentation, photos and slides that we've used to document the discoveries up on Silver Lake. And it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for you to see these. And I know it's Sunday, and I know on Sunday most people sit in the back of the church as opposed to the front of the church. But what I would recommend is that if you can, move a little bit closer to the front pew, so when I give my sermon, you'll actually be able to see some of these pictures better. But I'll leave that up to you. Just a word about this painting here that Larry was just talking to me about it. This is a painting that my brother Dave, who is a lifelong and accomplished artist, he painted this picture, and in the picture, that's actually me, and this is one of our ancestors here. And he painted this beautiful picture, and it's a site that's up on Silver Lake. And he knew how special that lake was, not only to me and to archaeology, but it was also a lake that was very, very special to my father. He used to bring us up there camping up in the middle of nowhere when we were just little boys, and he would paddle us around in his canoe up there when we were very, very young. So that's a little bit about that. See, this is better. If you got to hold this right here, don't you? Before I get started with talking, I know for the last 2 days we've seen time and time again throughout our discussions here, people have been throwing out the age of sites and the age of artifacts, and they've been throwing out, things such as 7,000 BP, 6,000 BP and whatever, and they've been throwing out dates for shorelines and whatever else. One of the things that, when you do Paleo-Indian archaeology, one of the things that you become particularly aware of is how careful you have to be when you're giving out dates, okay? And because the problem is there's actually two kinds of dates that archaeologists will quote to you, and a geologist will do the same. One is you're going to see radiocarbon years. They get their dates primarily through, in archaeology, primarily through C14 radiocarbon testing, and from that you get a date. But the thing to realize, to understand about a radiocarbon date, is that it's not the same as a regular calendar year date, okay? And for a while, archaeologists didn't know that, but it was found out through time that radiocarbon dates, as you went farther back in time, you really had to calibrate that date to what were more understandable in a way, calendar years before present. And before I explain a little bit more about that, when we say before present, when you see BP, it doesn't mean before August 21st, 2016. It means before 1950. So that's something else that you got to throw out there on that. BP means before 1950. But when you get back, when you look here and you start to go back, it doesn't matter a whole lot when you're talking the more recent past, because you're only going to be off by maybe a few hundred years, but you can see that as you get back into, particularly when you get back to early Archaic, late Paleo, early Paleo, when you start getting back into these days, these times, there's a pretty big difference. So a lot of times you'll see someone throw out the date, 10,000 BP. And I know our last speaker was talking about the date of the Caribou forest, and he said it was 10,000 BP. And that's exactly what it is. But that's in radiocarbon years. All of the dates that they got off the tree is all clustered in that 10,000 year BP range. But those are uncalibrated dates. And so sometimes people think, oh, the force was there 10,000 years ago. Well, actually, the force got buried around 11,500 years ago in actual calendar years, okay? And archaeologists, what they'll do is what we've learned to do is to take these radiocarbon dates, which run in a straight line here, and you got to sort of match them up, kind of calibrate them by matching them up to what we now have determined to be the actual calendar years, okay? And I'm not trying to confuse you here, but what I'm going to be doing, back up, what happens a lot of times is that that can become real confusing, not only to the researcher, but certainly to the people who are trying to learn from the message that's being given by the researcher. And one of the things that I've seen is through the years is a lot of times archaeologists, and a lot of people, but archaeologists in particular, will become pretty sloppy when throwing them dates out. And a lot of times they intermingle them in your same discussion, your same presentation. They'll throw out a radiocarbon year and say, well, this happened 6,000 BP. And then I've noticed they'll come back and say, and this happened 8,000 BP, but I know based upon my knowledge that that's an adjusted date. And so the problem is it becomes bad information. Okay, does that make sense? What I'm going to be doing, having said all of that as an introduction here, what I've learned is best to do is to use the calibration dates. And it just takes away from some of the confusion. So instead of using a radiocarbon date, I'm going to use actual dates, as you see when I go through here. And I think that's really important when you're going back in time and you're going to be talking about Paleo-Indian sites. It's best to have an idea when you really want to understand how long ago and how old these sites are here in the upper Great Lakes. You really appreciate it when you get into actual calibrated years before present, okay? So just I just wanted to let you know that. Now, to get going here, I'm going to be talking today about a project that took a number of years to complete, and it was the Silver Lake Basin Archaeological Survey Project. And this particular survey, it was a 3-part survey, and it took part at different times because we had to wait for low water levels in the basin in order to do the field work. It took place in 1987, 1988, then in the year 2000, and then again in 2003 up until 2011 when it really came to an end because the reservoir was again refilled. And the purpose of the survey that we took on, and it was a personal survey, more so than an academic survey, it was pretty much just to locate archaeological evidence of a late Pleistocene, early Holocene occupation in Marquette County. In other words, we were looking for evidence of early or late Paleo-Indians in the county. And the other purpose, of course, was to discover and document as many archaeological cultural sites as we could within the basin bed. And that was pretty much strictly what that project entailed. Silver Lake is located, if you're wondering where it is, it's located up here in northern Marquette County. If you can envision it on that, but it's just, here's Marquette and Issabiishpeming, and it's part of the Dead River hydroelectric system. And then of course there's 3 dams, the McClure, the Hoist, and then of course there's the Silver Lake Dam up here on Silver Lake. And that's where, this is where the survey took place, was up in that area up there. Now Silver Lake today is a large basin. It's essentially about 1,450 acres in size. But the lake, inside the lake basin today is actually the original lake. There's an original glacial lake there that's been there since the Great Lakean Glacier melted off on the Upper Peninsula. And that today, from that time period, from 1987 to 2006, which was when we documented the last site with the OSA, with the Office of the State Archaeologist down in Lansing, I documented 50 archaeological sites on that basin. And if you look at this, that's pretty impressive, especially when you look at this depiction here, this map, which shows the location of all 50 of those cultural archaeological sites that we were able to locate. One of the things that really stands out about Silver Lake is the overall age of the sites. We found very, very little evidence of a woodland occupation up on the lake out of all of these sites and all of the surface collections and the work that we did up there. But there was a great many early to late Paleo-Indian sites up there, and there was also a great many archaic sites. Actually, the majority of the sites.
It's kind of loud.
Okay.
Hold the mic away a little bit more.
Right here? How's this? All right, this is better. Okay, so actually, most of the sites that you see up there, the majority are actually, and surprisingly, Paleo-Indian in age. And we're going to talk about why that actually happened up on Silver Lake. We started the Silver Lake project. It actually started at the same time that John Gordo and I, because we're the ones that initiated the Silver Lake survey. It came about the same time that we started our search for Paleo-Indians on Deer Lake. And it was that same year, in 1987, that we started that search for Paleo-Indian activity in Marquette County. It was that year, of course, that we made the spectacular find on Deer Lake, and we proved to everyone the old saying that it's better to be lucky than good, because it was immediately upon our start of our project that we, in a truest sense, and I got to tell you, we stumbled upon that particular spear point laying in the drain basin bed on Deer Lake, and of course that was the first evidence, documented evidence that anyone ever had of Paleo-Indians, late Paleo-Indians, being in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That was a Scottsbluff Cody point made from Hickston silicified sandstone that we've been hearing about a lot today. The radiocarbon dates, and then sometimes I'll tell you both, but radiocarbon dates for Scottsbluff Cody, the radiocarbon dates aren't coming from the UP or from Wisconsin. They're coming from west of our Great Lakes area on other sites that are certainly out in the western states. But the dates that we do have that give us an idea of how old Scottsbluff is, the dates cluster right around 9,500 to 8,800 radiocarbon years before present. And to calibrated years before present, that equates out to around 10,800 to 9,800. So we're talking about, I always throw out the term about 10,000 years old. And when I say 10,000, I mean 10,000 actual years old, okay? Of course, the find on Silver Lake was nothing short of spectacular. First of all, the most important thing was that it provided that proof that late Paleo, early Archaic people were living in the UP. But the artifacts themselves were just amazing, and we feel that it was just a cache of 30-some spear points laying in a small tabletop area. The points had been burned and had been intentionally broken in some sort of a ceremony, obviously. And we think that it was more than likely a cremation burial, similar to what you've seen down at the Renier site down in Wisconsin. And this is, you can see, these are all of the artifacts. The other amazing thing that came out of that particular find, wasn't all of these, actually a wide variety, if you will, of different styles of Scottsbluff and Eden points, but also, which was very, very important to us, into helping us understand this time period, were these four artifacts right here. Those are what ordinarily would be termed early Archaic as opposed to late Paleo. And you can see here that there's pretty much a classic dovetail St. Charles point here, with that sort of a base. This is just a sort of a side notch, and here is just a real classic chert-made Thebes point, which is telling us that, and if you look at this, the dating, the radiocarbon dating of early Archaic Thebes cluster in the eastern part of the United States, and radiocarbon dating on Scottsbluff in Eden in the western part of the United States, you'll see that the dates actually match up. And here's proof, even based not based upon just carbon-14 dates, but that there was this intermingling, if you will, or this transfer of artifacts between what were certainly two different cultures and different complexes of people who were living in North America at the time. So that was important. Now, What happened was the project on Deer Lake, it started on March 21st, 1987, and it officially ended, we always say it officially ended on this day when I took this photo of John, because in this reservoir, this was a reservoir, and it was refilling. And once it filled up, of course, our project, because we were working with Dr. Marla Buckmaster from Northern Michigan University and John Anderton from NMU at the time. And of course, this put a definite stop to our work. We immediately, though, when we finished up with the Deer Lake project at Gordo, we immediately thought about Silver Lake. And we went up to that lake immediately afterwards. And there's two reasons. Number one is that lake level, the basin level at Silver Lake at that time was also very low. And the reason it was low, it wasn't because they had intentionally drained it, but back in 1986, 87, and 88, there was a wide regional drought occurring. And a lot of you might even remember that time period because a lot of our ponds and small lakes here in UP actually dried up. And a lot of them were spring-fed lakes, and the groundwater, because of no snowpack and no rain and everything else, everything lowered. And you also saw that up on the Silver Lake Basin. And this is a photo of how much that basin had actually dropped. And this is on one of the archaeological sites when we were up there back in 1987. The other reason we targeted Silver Lake was for another really good reason, was because in 1986, when we started our project, when we started researching Paleo-Indians, I let the word out to anybody, if anybody ever found anything out there, to come and let me know. And this guy here named Brad Waters, who was a fisherman up on Silver Lake, got a hold of me and he said, yeah, I found a quartz scraper, is what he described it as. He says, when I was fishing up on the north side of the lake. And I said, oh, well, just stop over to the house sometime, I'll take a look at it. And to be honest with you, I wasn't interested at all in a quartz scraper. But when Brad shows up, he ain't holding a quartz scraper. What he's holding is just a classic Hickston agate basin point. And again, the dates for agate basin. And this is again, these are calibrated dates. It's somewhere around 12,000 to 11,500 years old. Okay. And so that's even older than Cody Scottsbluff. And of course, so that's one of the reasons, main reasons again, why we descended upon Silver Lake. Back then, I took that information, I documented exactly everything that Brad told me. He wasn't able to locate exactly where he found it on a map, but he was able to show me approximately where he found it, anyway, up on the North Shoreline. And I got a hold of the point, I made drawings, I made photographs, and I gave all that information down to John Halsey, so at least we had some documentation of that point being found up there somewhere, okay? And so that was an important part of our survey, just making that documentation. In 1987, this is what it looked like. You can see the high water mark up in here, up in this area where the driftwood is, and it had drained just through natural processes. The basin was down. And this was one of the first sites that we found, and the reason we found it was because that's where the road goes to the lake. Back in 1987, it was very hard to access most parts of the lake. And it still is today. It still is today of the basin. There's a couple of roads that come in on the east end, and this is where one of the roads hit. And where it hit, when we checked these areas, it was littered. This area that had been exposed was littered with artifacts. And you can see just a variety of different materials. You can see over here just a lot of flakes. You're always going to find, more than anything, you're going to find debitage on any habitation site. And it was certainly true with almost all of the sites that we found up on Silver Lake. And it was certainly true with Silver Lake number 4. But we did find a couple of very interesting projectile points. One being, it appears to be an archaic stemmed corner remove type point, kind of a common type of a point that you might see during archaic times. But this one was particularly interesting because it's made from that magic stone, Hickston silicified sandstone again. And it's a broken point that was reused and refurbished into a tool, whereby this side was all resharpened and it must have been used for scraping or cutting purposes. And it's a side-notched early archaic type point, okay? It's not a Paleo-Indian point. It wouldn't be classified as that, but it would be one of your early archaic type projectile points. So again, it was something very early. But 30 days after I took that picture of John standing on Deer Lake, with that forlorn look on his face, looking down at the water-filled excavation unit. 30 days to the day after we left, took that picture, sure enough, we hit the jackpot up on Silver Lake. And it was in an area that was pretty eroded, as you can see here. And where I'm kneeling, looking down right here, and I'm looking down at this, which you can't see it in the photograph. But if you were here where I was 10,000 years ago, that's what you would have seen. You'd have seen someone else kneeling there, probably cooking their caribou over an open fire at their campsite. This particular point right here, the reason we think it was a campsite was the fact that we not only found the projectile point base, but we found the other artifacts that were associated with it, because laying very nearby, within a matter of just a couple of feet actually, was a couple of important artifacts. One was, I keep hitting the wrong button here. One was this large large chert scraper. This, of course, is the point base, and this is the base of a Scottsbluff point. And this is an interesting artifact that is very much like what they call a Cody knife. And a Cody knife is a diagnostic butchering cutting tool that was used by Cody complex people. And this is different than a lot of them, what you'll see in the fact that you don't see it stemmed per se. But what they did with this one was they took a piece of real nice vein quartz, they thinned the base right here, and it was hafted. They ground the sides, it was hafted, and they put this diagonal blade section on here that was very carefully flaked into that diagonal blade, which is real typical of when someone describes a Cody knife. That's pretty much the blade. That's how the blade is going to look. So it was I guess more of a crude form of a Cody knife. The point itself, again, typical of what you'd find at a campsite, because what you see here is that it's got a transverse snap break that goes right across, right through here, right above the hafted area. But this little red spot here, you can't see it on this photograph. That's an impact fracture scar. And what happened was, it's very obvious what happened. When someone was using this spear point, and it was on the end of a spear, they speared something. And it hit with impact, of course, and it drove back against the point. And that's what broke the point, and it snapped it off right here. But that force that was exerted on this end was transformed down into here, and it knocked that off. Now, the reason that's a common, one of the things that you find on campsites as opposed to kill sites, you find these of all ages, no matter what, whether you're in Paleoindian or Archaic or even in woodland, you're going to find that people, after they break a projectile, after the projectile point, that the most valuable part of your weapon system isn't the point, it's the shaft. And it's just like today, if you're out hunting if you're a bow hunter, you know that you can dull an arrow head, your broadhead, or break it, but you're always going to take the shaft back and rearm it. And people have always done that. And so obviously what we think happened here was that they returned to their campsite, unbound this broken part of the projectile point, and just tossed it off there, and that's where it laid until John and I came up with it. 1986, 1987, I got to be honest with you, we didn't get to the lake a lot. The access to it was extremely difficult. In fact, the whole west end of the basin, which was we couldn't get to, because you had to do it on foot, and it was 4 miles up and 4 miles back, so it's an 8-mile walk. And back then, we didn't accomplish that at all. But when we returned in 1988, we were a little bit smarter. We came out there with canoes and boats, and so we were able to navigate our way around the lake. And we got up to the west end of the lake, which we hadn't done previously, and found some incredible sites up there. This being one of them. It was Silver Lake number 6, and I'm going to be talking about that site later because it's going to come back and provide some information. But that's what it looked like, and we'd found this ultra-thin biface cutting implement that was made from some sort of a very like a felsitic material, like a siltstone. And but the raw material yet hasn't been identified. That artifact is down in Lansing right now. But the one thing that I was looking for, more than anything, was something that would date back to something. I wanted to find what Brad Waters found. That's what I wanted to find. I wanted to find something that was even older than what we found at Gordo. And on the day that I just took the previous photographs that you saw, John and I were up on the west end, coming back in a canoe, and we went past this island here that sits out in the middle of the basin. And if you went back at the end of the Ice Age, this piece of highland that today is an island was highland that sat directly adjacent to the lake outlet. Okay. perfect spot for camping, and without a doubt. But it was very, very heavily eroded. You can see that it's basically, from an archaeological context standpoint, it's been destroyed. But we put the boat in right there, the canoe, and we walked across, and when I got to this spot that you see right there, where my shoulder bag is, they're laying in this lag of wave-strewn rock, was what you see right here. And of course, anybody who knows anything about Paleoindian archaeology and who's been out surface collecting, you know that that's the thing that makes you do the 2-foot jump in the gibby pump in a hurry, because you knew that you just hit it. You just found something that was extraordinary. So what I did was, of course, I grabbed my camera out of my bag, took this documentation photo of the artifact exactly as it was laying there, and then I snapped this timeless shot as I pulled this incredible spear point made from Hickston silicified sandstone out of the rocks. And it was just a very, very emotional and spiritual moment for me to be able to do that, to be the first person in so many years to actually hold that in my hand. And what it was a very special kind of a point. Initially, we typed it as an agate basin variant, okay, of a late Paleoindian point. But it was pointed out to me by my good friend John Anderton, who had handled and done some work with very similar hell gap points in the western states, that based upon even the shape of it, but mainly the technology that was used in order to manufacture that point, that was just a classic hell gap point. And again, that's just the name that's given to that particular point by archaeologists. The dates were very, very old, comparable to agate basin. In fact, a lot of times you'll find them on the same site together, okay? But the hell gap point was used a little bit longer in time, according to C14 dates that we get off hell gap sites. But it's an extremely old point. Again, in calendar years, it's 10,500 to 11,500 to around 10,800 years ago. Extremely old, okay? We discovered and documented 10 archaeological sites in 1987-88. This, again, is just one of the other early points that we found from one of the other sites. And I thought that maybe never again, I would never get up to that lake. I didn't know if I would. But as you can imagine, we were ecstatically glad that we found supporting evidence of what we found at the Gordo site to prove that Paleo-Indians were indeed living here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan back at the end, just after the end of the Ice Age. Now, one of the things that happened back in 1993 was that the UPCO, UP Power, was looking to relicense all of their hydroelectric facilities on the Dead River, along the Dead River system, and of course one of those being Silver Lake. And so we found out they were going to do that, but we also found out they weren't going to do any archaeological work up there. And so Marla Buckmaster and myself contacted John Halsey down in Lansing to tell him that you better remind UPCO and FERC that before there's any licenses issued here in relicensing, that they need to get up there and they need to do an evaluation of the sites that are up there. And they did in fact do that. And this is a copy of the report that came out, and it was from the Institute for Minnesota Archaeology that came in, that group that came in to do the archaeological work. They did phase 1, phase 2 research. And I just want to read this. This was their research design. And here's what they said they were going to do. The ancient sites discovered by Paquette during the mid to late 1980s represent the earliest evidence of human occupation in the UP of Michigan. Because of the importance of this discovery, the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office requested that archaeological reconnaissance be conducted around the shores of the lake to determine whether any additional sites were present. The objective of the IMA survey, therefore, was to determine whether any previously unreported archaeological resources were present at the Silver Lake Basin. The condition of the reported sites on the basin was also of concern. So that's what their mission was right there. Now they had two major problems, however. When they went up to begin their project on June 1st, the water level hadn't even been lowered yet. And so the water levels were at high water levels, not even close to what they were in 1987 and 88 when we had conducted our survey. They were able to convince UPCO to begin a partial drainage of the basin then so that they could at least investigate the upper eroded portions of the lake. And there was an agreement that they would in fact do that. So they lowered it in a matter of a few feet. Still wasn't enough to uncover all of the sites. But John Halsey down in Lansing agreed with UPCO that it was okay, just go ahead and do the survey anyway, even though you're not going to be able to get at the sites. And they did it, which I thought, as they wrote, to eliminate the need for a subsequent expensive drawdown of the lake. And I always wondered about that. I mean, don't you just pull the plug and drain the water? And I'm not quite sure what that was going to cost them on this. But anyway, so they did that. The other thing, the other problem that they had, and this was even worse than that in one sense that we found out, was that the crew that they hired to come there and do it were totally inexperienced in Upper Great Lakes archaeology and conducting any Upper Great Lakes archaeology. And after working with them a while, some of them were just, some younger people who I wonder if they had any experience working in archaeology. They contacted us. We're keeping in touch with them because they were nice people. I'm not going to sit here and rip on them because they were very, very nice people. It's just that they didn't know what they were doing. But they kept in contact with us, and they made it known to us that they weren't finding anything up there. And I thought that was kind of odd. I thought, well, of course, the water levels aren't low, but I also personally visited a couple of the sites that they had been on and said you didn't find anything. And when I got there, I noticed that there was artifacts strewn all about. And it dawned on me that what they didn't know is they weren't recognizing this material, quartzite. And here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I'll say back in Marquette County, that's the predominant raw material that's used from Paleo times through Archaic times. It's quartzite and quartz. Those are the two local raw materials that people really paid attention to. And up on Silver Lake, as you're going to see later, that a lot of when you get into the late Paleo times, like during your Scottsbluff period and into early Archaic times, it was by far the predominant material. People were making great use of local quartzite deposits to make their tools and weapon systems. So they didn't know what that looked like. So we went up there, so we agreed, and they said, well, can you come up and show us? So we did. Marla, Buckmaster, and I went up there, we helped them, we brought them to, they had a boat, and we floated around the reservoir, and of course I brought them to Silver Lake number 4 site. And this is a photo of some of the artifacts, of some of the ships, quartzite flakes, that we collected that day and that they then included in their report, okay? So they had a couple of problems. So it was no wonder that when after they did their work, and they were up there a long time, it wasn't that they did shoddy work. They did good work per se, but they just didn't do it, they didn't know what they were looking for to start with, plus the biggest problem they had was that water level. It was just prohibited any really, any form of a valuable research project to be completed successfully. Here's what they said. This comes right from their final report. Now, again, I'm going to read this. You don't have to read through this. I'll read it. It says, during the initial walkover of the shoreline, it was clear that high water levels were obscuring areas of interest. Of particular importance was the observation that the water levels were still considerably higher, between 3 to 4 feet, than they had been in 1987 and 1988, and that there was far more sand buildup on some of the sites than there had been previously. Sites 20 MQ35, 20 MQ73, 20 MQ74 were inundated during the entire course of the project on Silver Lake. What they didn't write on here was that there's two of the other sites were also inundated. They just went to the wrong spot because I know that 2 of the other sites, so 5 of the 10 sites that I had reported were still underwater, okay? So keep that in mind, but they did get on the other ones. And here's what they said in conclusion. Although, and this is no surprise when you think about it, although field conditions were sometimes not ideal, we believe that any additional sites comparable to those discovered by Paquette would have been discovered by the survey. Based on the absence of any such sites, we conclude that Paquette's initial study identified all of the primary archaeological properties immediately adjacent to the lake. Because of the massive disturbance that had taken place at the Silver Lake Basin, and remember, they were just on the upper levels of that lake where high energy erosion was occurring, that take place at Silver Lake, it is our opinion that none of the sites, either individually or as a group, are eligible for listing on the National Register. And as a result of that report, I might as well have wrote my reports on toilet paper. I concluded that. That was one of my conclusions. But based on that, our State Historic Preservation Office, and our Office of State Archaeologists both approved that report. And of course, UPCO was given their relicense. And the water was just left to go up, and so the sites were ignored, totally ignored. I was, as you can imagine, I was disappointed, but being a good Youper, more than I was disappointed, I was pissed, to put it mildly. And so I thought, okay, I went back up to the lake, and this is a year after they were on these sites and said, well, this is on one of the sites where they said, well, it was high erosion, there's nothing occurring. This is back on Silver Lake number 4 site. And I went there in July, which was 1 year after they had been there. And of course, then the lake levels were at the high water levels. They weren't even lowered that 1 to 2 feet that UPCO agreed to do for the survey. But it was up in the water's up in the trees, so it's sort of washing new things out. And look what I found. It was just, I couldn't believe it. I walk up to the shoreline, walk right down from where the road is, and laying in the logs, and it was intermingled with this driftwood that you saw earlier in the photos, were all of these incredible quartzite artifacts. There's a lot of flakes that came along with this, but there's several bifaces, and here's a big fractured biface that was there in the process of doing something with, but they broke it. Here's a quartzite flake. Look at this. You know what that is? That's the base of a Hickston Eden Point. That's the very base. It's a broken base off of another Scottsbluff Eden Point, and made from Hickston. Also found with it was this small scraper, which was, these are laying within a real small area. I got to mention that, maybe about a 15 to 10 foot wide, 10 foot circular area. So everything was together. And also with it was the tip, again, of another, the tip. I got to go back here, hang on. Was the very tip of a Hickston Point, which obviously would have been another Scottsbluff, Eden-type Paleogene point. And so there was nothing I could do except brood about it and document the fact that, okay, this is also there on the site that they were just on, that they said there was nothing there. But UPCO got their way, and things and life moved on. And I never thought I'd get an opportunity to get back up to the lake, to be honest with you. And we just moved on with our life. What Marla and I did was we took Marla Buckmaster from NMU. We took the artifacts that John Gordo and I had found in '87 and '88, and we studied those artifacts, and we wrote a report on those artifacts and on the discoveries of what we had found. And we published it in the publication Investigating the Archaeological Record of the Great Lakes State. It was published in 1996 by Western Michigan University. And the title of the paper that we wrote itself was kind of earthbreaking. We said surface indications of a late Pleistocene and early Holocene occupation at Silver Lake Basin, Marquette County, Michigan. We were going to be the first ones to point out how old these sites were, and to put a sequence, some dating to the sites and the occupations that occurred here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Because what we did was, we took the projectile points, the Agate Basin, Hell Gap, and the Scottsbluff points that were found not only up on Silver Lake, but also on nearby Deer Lake, which only sat a few miles to the south of us. And for the very first time, we proposed a chronological sequence of the Upper Peninsula Paleogene occupations. And we also proposed, coincided that sequence of occupation with the sequence of known late glacial events that had occurred also here in Marquette County. And when we did that, it was in itself, it was pretty earth-shaking in our conclusions. What we did know, of course, is that we know that the glaciers pull back across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The Great Lakean ice sheet finally melted at some point here, and we're not sure exactly when that happened, but we know about when it happened. And it happened probably between 13,000 and 12,500 calendar years ago is when the Upper Peninsula was totally ice-free. And that ice-free period is known as the Gribben phase, and that's what we refer to it as. And it was also during what is called the Younger Dryas period, which was a substantial thing that was occurring actually worldwide at the time. And we know that by that point in time, Silver Lake is sitting right here. Okay, and Silver Lake could have been available for human occupation that early in time. We also know that that it came back, that the ice came back, and we know that because of the buried Gribben forest. And by the way, that this is me when I worked for the Cliffs Natural Resources. And one of our jobs one day was, at the time I worked in their safety and security department. I was senior staff for them. And our job was to go out and check gates that were being used by people who were deer hunting and were coming in on the property. And so I had to go out and check some gates, and when we did, we found an area where they had uncovered again more portions of this buried Gribben forest. I took the opportunity to go out there and do a photo shoot with me and my partner next to all these old stumps. And I also grabbed a bunch of these. And if you ever went to my garage right now, you'd find my wife's still mad at me because I got all of these pieces of ancient forests that are in the end of in my garage. But the important thing about that buried forest was the age of it. And the age of it, and there was a cluster a huge cluster of good dates that came off at the buried Griffin Forest. And all of those dates all clustered to around what we had heard earlier, 10,000 BP. And those again that's radiocarbon years. But the actual years are 11,500 years ago. And you can see how far, and this drawing here shows you how far that this may have advanced into Marquette County. But at that point in time, the amazing thing was that ice only came in partially into the UP, and it never overrode Silver Lake, okay? We know that based upon the geological study in the area by geologists from NMU, that Silver Lake was close to it, right on the edge of that glacier, but the glacier never overrode the lake. And in fact, you can see this drawing, this depiction right here, shows you about where the lake was situated during the Marquette advance, the outer moraine of the advance. It's right there. These portions of UP are covered in ice, and Silver Lake is sitting right there. And it's just a matter of a few kilometers. It's almost within sight of this massive ice sheet. So think about that. And think about what I'm going to tell you what we found so far and what we're going to find on Silver Lake, where it's used as a regular base camp area for Paleo Indians who are coming in, who are traveling from all the way down from Wisconsin all the way into the UP, and they're heading right there. And you'll see that as we go through this. So what we were able to do, what Marla and I were able to do, was we were able to take those projectile points and compare known radiocarbon dating of those particular point styles and those point traditions, and match them up to what was occurring here in Marquette County, here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan back at that time. And for example, the Agate Basin, when the Agate Basin point was being used and being lost up on Silver Lake, and that was about 12,000 to 11,500 years ago, based on C14 dates, that was an ice-free period. But it was also when that Marquette ice sheet was approaching the UP during the younger Dryas period, okay? So you've got this ice-free period, but you've got all of a sudden this reoccurrence of the glacier bearing down on you. And that occurred at the exact same time period that the C14 dates show up for that particular spear point. The Hell Gap point, we know that the dates cluster around 11,500 to 10,800 years ago. We also know that 11,500 marks the maximum advance of the Marquette Glacier based upon the buried Griffin Forest. These people were essentially hunting that forest, if you understand that. That's another reason why I thought it was really kind of a cool thing to have pieces of that ancient wood out of the Griffin Forest, knowing that people were here. And we actually have in our hands artifacts and spear points left behind by the people who were actually hunting in that forest that probably had encompassed parts of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Okay, we also know that's also a time period when these people here were paraglacial hunters. That glacier is sitting right there, and they're right on the edge of it. And undoubtedly, what they're doing is they're hunting what we think would be the big game that would have also been gathered at that same spot, and that would be caribou. Because these vast caribou herds today that we see far to the north with hundreds of thousands of animals, well, this is as far north as you could go in North America. This was the great end of it. And so all of these animals, these herd animals, such as caribou, they would be here. And one of the things that we heard Chris talk about earlier was like the relationship between, say, Silver Mound in Hickston with people that were living in the Western Great Lakes, and how they weren't living per se on a Silver Mound, but they were traveling nomadically through this region. And we have direct evidence of that's exactly what was occurring. That these people are armed, all of their spear points and many of their artifacts are made from Hickston and stone from Wisconsin. But they're traveling up in probably this yearly cycle, and what they're doing is that they're following those caribou herds from summer calving grounds to winter grounds, and they're going back and forth from what is today the northern UP down into Wisconsin. And while they're doing it, they're rearming themselves and retooling themselves with this precious stone, this Hickston. Now, we also know that the Scottsbluff Cody people, and based upon the number of Scottsbluff points that we found and the dates from those, that's the early Holocene. There is no more ice. Everything has changed. The ice has melted. It's gone back up into wherever it is today. It's working its way actually back up to there. But it's also a time when the lake levels were receding to what we just heard previously in the previous presentation. It's starting to recede into what they call that Houghton Low, where the Great Lakes are going down. The Great Lakes are dropping immediately after the ice sheets recede. And that's when people, again, are living here, okay, in the UP. Now, in 2004, John Anderton and Bob Regis from NMU and myself, we all co-authored another paper, and we took what Marla and I had written and we took it to the next level. And this was in a publication, the Late Paleo-Indian Great Lakes, and this was published by the Canadian Museum of Civilization. And the title of our paper was Geological Context for Late Paleo-Indian Archaeology in North Central Upper Peninsula of Michigan, USA. And what we did was we took off from what Marla and I had written in our previous paper, and we compared. Actually, we did a more or less a geological study of the entire Gribben front that you can see here, the terminal moraine, and we were able to determine that it wasn't only Silver Lake, but of course it was Deer Lake, it was Teal Lake, and Goose Lake. All of these sites we found Paleo-Indian sites on, by the way. And at all four of these lakes, and there's other lakes there, they're sitting right on the edge of this glacier. And they're acting as this magnet, but they're also acting as a focal point for habitation and a destination point probably for people that are moving from the south to the north, down to south, up to the north, that are coming back and forth during Paleo-Indian times. And that's why we find such a high percentage of Paleo-Indian sites on these inland lakes. And when we get later in time, the environment changes, people change, their economy changes, the animals change, and you'll see that these lakes, that a lot of these inland lakes are less and less used for purposes of habitation, okay? And that's why you find so many, again, Paleo-Indian sites in Marquette County. There's going to be another reason, and I'm going to tell you in a minute here why we find this huge number of late paleo sites and paleo sites in Marquette County. Again, I never thought we'd ever get back up on the lake, but in 2002, the Silver Lake Dam was going to be repaired. There were some needed repairs. UPCO had put off the repairs, but they're also required to do a dike modification where they put in what they call a fuse plug, okay? So they lowered the lake levels and they exposed all of the previously documented sites from 1987 and 88, and actually the water was just a tad lower than that. And of course, with these words ringing in my head from the IMA study that there were no other archaeological sites up on that lake, and the ones that we did find were poo-fooed, I was on a mission, okay? I'm gonna tell you what, I was on a mission. And so this is what these are the sites that I mapped, and those are GPS waypoints where I mapped sites during 2002. And I just want to read this because when I wrote this, I was actually almost sweating when I was writing this. But I said, during a 3-month window of opportunity, and it was only 3 months, in 2002, I logged over 1,000 miles driving back and forth to the Silver Lake Basin, walked over 200 miles during the on-site survey, documented new discoveries with over 300 digital and 35 millimeter photographs, revisited all the previously documented sites, and submitted detailed documentation on 16 archaeological sites to the OSA in Lansing, which included 10 new sites. In 4 words to UPCO, it was in your mama's face is what I did, is what I was thinking when I was doing it, because I thought, okay, you were wrong, okay, in what you had done and what you did, and so what I want to prove is that there's more to Silver Lake than what your paid study did. And so and what we did was, I revisited all of the earlier sites. This was one of them, and I got to talk about this. This is a photo that was taken in 1988. This was a site I visited one time in 1988. And all I saw at the site when I got there was I saw some debitage, some quartz flakes and such. But what you see here, I know it looks like just a bunch of rocks to most people here, but this is actually FCR. It's fire-cracked rock that's laying in the midst of other rock, but it's the remains of a hearth, okay? And associated with that hearth, with that FCR, with that fire-cracked rock, were numerous flakes that were strewn about there. Left everything there, but I took this photograph. I marked this location on a map. I drew in a verbal description and I reported that down to Lansing, and it was given this the site number 20MQ74. The site was not visited during the 1993 IMA survey of the lake, but I was on it. And I remembered exactly where that hearth was. I knew exactly where it was. And even though it was years later, and I went back in 2002. And when I got there, of course, there was still this lake bottom silt covering that was still covering much of the material that had been just recently come out from under the water. But every time it rained and every time the wind blew, it began to expose more and more. So I made multiple visits to this one site to get back to here. And what I found was pretty amazing. One thing that I found that they didn't find back in '93 was quartzite, and it was there. Flakes were everywhere. Again, this is going to be a Paleo-Indian site. You can see here that there's this these are some of the quartzite flakes that you see up here, just some of them. This is interesting because not only did I find the quartzite flakes, I found the biface they were actually working on when they took these flakes off, and it was actually broken. All of these were laying together in one spot, which tells me it's not necessarily a non-disturbed things weren't necessarily all disturbed and thrown about, but it had broken half, and it was actually put two pieces back together. And I actually was able to fit several of these pieces back onto that biface. That tells you it's coming exactly, that it was part of the chippage that was coming right off that piece. There was a lot of quartzite tools. Some of them are large tools, rather crude, you might think, but you can see a bunch of them there. Oh boy, oh, here we go. That you can see down here. These are all utilized, big utilized flakes, and some of them are actually, that's part of a biface actually. And, but they were making a lot of use of quartzite, as we expected. Here you can see again, these are other artifacts that were surface collected. Here you can see what we think is a piece of, right here is a piece of Hickson, but it was a utilized flake. It's been flaked all the way across the top. This is a utilized, like a chopper type thing that would have a backed handle on it, but a nice blade all the way along here. These are bifaces. Here's a chert biface. Here's a quartzite biface, or excuse me, a quartz biface. And here, I can show you picture after picture of artifacts that were laying on that site. And here again, these are two other quartzite bifaces that were found. And this is why I like going out on rainy days. These things shine. The best time to go out and look for surface artifacts is when it's raining. Because the natural backdrop, what happens is it turns really black, but the cryptocrystalline materials, whether it be quartzites or Hickson or chert or quartz, it just shines like little stars out there. So I never passed up an opportunity to go out in the rain when a lot of other people were hovered in the house. The age of the site, I hadn't found any diagnostic artifacts on the site, but lo and behold, there it was. And this is an incredible find, actually. It's a very rare find. Not the point type in particular, but the artifact itself. The base, of course, this is a classic, it's made from chert, by the way, but it's a Scottsbluff point that has been resharpened numerous times, and it eventually ends up being a working tool, a punch or a drill. But the base is a dead giveaway that this is a late Paleo-Indian Cody Scottsbluff point and site. And I'm going to come back to this site again in a few minutes here and talk a little bit more about it. What I did was to make sure that John Halsey down in Lansing understood what I was finding, I sent him reams of documentation. And contained those documentation were photos, GPS points, any number of things. I sent them along detailed photographs such as this of these newly exposed sites. And you can see where I drew in and detailed where things were occurring, and this, of course, is on that Silver Lake 9 site. Here's another one that I sent down to him so that they knew exactly where, not only based upon my notes and my photographs that I had taken, but also based upon these particular photographs, that you would also know where things were and where things are, in fact, still on the site. Now, besides revisiting the sites in 2002, I also went, and as I told you, I documented numerous other new sites. I'm only going to talk about one of them because I can't sit here and talk about all of them. This is the Silver Lake Allison site, and this sits on the shoreline of the far east end of the lake, some distance away from the site that we were just talking about. It's named the Allison site. It's named after I got to tell you this, it's named after my granddaughter, Allison Heitinen, who was there with me numerous times going to that site. She at that point in time was one of my co-workers, and I always enjoyed taking her out because she was a tough little kid, and she loved going out to visit these sites. And to her, to what she really believed was she was visiting her ancestors, and she truly believed that because Grandpa told her that was the truth. And but anyway, this is another amazing site. And, and two things amazing. Number one is the amount of artifacts that came off of it. But the other amazing thing that I thought was the concentration of the artifacts, because everything was coming from this real small area. It was like up in here, there's nothing, but down in this just generally small area here that we found numerous artifacts. But keep in mind that this is very, very shallow water out here, and the site extended out into the water. And even if you're out way over here, every time if this water goes down 1 foot, you've probably got 10 to 15 feet of shoreline, additional shoreline. So it's a very shallow end of the lake. But we were on the upper part of that site in 2002, and what we found was again, surprise, quartzite, by the hundreds of flakes of quartzite. And a lot of quartzite tools, bifaces, and here you can see a quartzite biface. Here's one. This is a very, very interesting artifact. It's a projectile point. And what it is, it's a St. Charles dovetail point made from an unlocal exotic chert. And of course, we knew that based on C14 dates, plus based upon what we found at the Gordo site, that these particular types of projectile, early archaic projectile points were being used at the same time here in the UP as were Scottsbluff Cody. So even though it's considered by people will call it early archaic, think about early archaic as really occurring same time as what we call late paleo. So it's a site, so it's a projectile point that's comparable in age to what we found to the Scottsbluff. But the most exciting find came here, and this is again another one of the photos that I sent down to John Halsey, so that he knew exactly what we were doing on this site. And see this right here? It says find spot of Plano Lancelet Point on August 28, 2002, which I sent on information. Now this is how careful you got to be when you're out searching, doing the surface collection. I was walking along the beach just where you saw it in the sand, and this is sand, and the waves had actually washed it up and had covered portions of the beach there, just adjacent to the water. So it was a new deposit of sand. And when I was walking along that, and I was actually looking in the water, not so much in the sand, but when I got to this spot, all I saw was this. See that little dried spot right there? It's about the size of a dime, maybe even a little bit smaller. But I recognized it for its color. It was this yellowish, sort of a yellowish color, cream color. And to me at the time, that's the same color as the Magic Stone Hixton silicified sandstone. And what I did was, this is great, with this photo, because I stuck my fingers in, my thumb and my finger in, and you could see how I traced it. And when I put my fingers together, I felt the opposing lateral edges of a biface. And then I took my hand and I sort of pulled it up to the tip, and you can see that where my thumb and my finger go, and I lifted that tip up. And I knew right away that it was another awesome, probably a Paleo-Indian point. And then I took the photo of it as it was laying there, as it partially pulled out, and I took a photo of it. And I got to tell you this, up there it says HSS, Paleo-Indian projectile point. Now, you might think that means Hixton silicified sandstone, okay? But after talking to Chris this morning, it means, I used to think it was Hixton silicified sandstone, but now I know that it isn't that, it's something else, okay? But it's another sort of an orthoquartzite, but we've identified it as not being, because of the attributes of it, that it's, even though it's close to that, both in color and also you can see right through this thing. I'll show you a second here. That we know that it's not. Now, this is something that's going to be of great interest to everyone here who came here to hear about copper, because everything we found on that site seemed to be there was nothing that indicated that it was late archaic or woodland. The diagnostics we found showed it to be late paleo or even into perhaps early paleo based upon that point and the other artifacts that were found there. This was found also there amidst the other artifacts. It's a piece of what appears to be modified copper. It's a large piece, and it's been hammered and shaped into this sort of an obscure shape. It's not a tool. It's not something that we know is being used for, but it was something that they took and they worked on it, and this is what it was. And I have no idea what it was. But to me, it might indicate that early, because we talked about it before, that as soon as people are here, as soon as people are in the UP, they're picking up copper. And they're going, wow, what can I do with this? And it took them a while to really figure out how to work it. And the technology had to come around to actually figure out, okay, how do I make a spear point out of this? And I can just envision a Paleo-Indian, because this comes off of a Paleo-Indian site, somebody 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, picking up a piece of copper and going, well, I wonder if I can hammer it into some shape. And they did, and maybe this is being used for something. But we don't know, we certainly don't know what that is. But it is an exciting find to find copper, modified copper on a Paleo-Indian site. And that did occur on that particular site. I was at Allison, by the way, when I made that discovery of that particular spear point, and we watched the sunset that night, and I held that spear point up to the sunset, and you could actually see my fingers through it. It's that beautiful orthoquartzite that it was made from. The other artifacts, I'll go through it just really kind of quick here. You can just see examples of some of the things that we found in the photos that I sent down to Lansing at the time. These are other photos in fine spots. This here is a plano biface up here made from cataract silicified sandstone that Christopher had talked about earlier. I took a photo not only of the artifact, several photos of the artifact, and submitted them to the OSA. I also took photos of the find site that you can see up there in the corner and up here. And actually that's where my GPS marked it, plus took a photo of it, blah, blah, blah. Sent that all down. The other thing we're finding, and interesting, besides artifacts, they're thinking, well, we're just looking for artifacts, but it was more than that. We were also looking for any exposed cultural features, and that would include primarily hearths. And there were any number of intact hearths that were weathering out of the surface. And here you can see, here's an FCR concentration here at Coles Creek site, and here's another one. It says another FCR concentration. That's firecracked rock. And I don't have it in these photos here, but as these weathered away, and again, I continued to visit them, and when I say weathered away, as the wind blew and as the rain came, they became more and more exposed, and more of the parent soil just blew away. In association with, and I wish I had put this photograph in here because you'd love it, but I didn't. In association with that hearth was a copper adze. Which is, if I walked up there one day and it was laying right on the surface and it had blown out, and I got a really great picture of it, which is, of that particular artifact. And again, that was something that I submitted down to Lansing. I'm not going to read this letter because I don't have the time, but I submitted all of that information down to the Office of the State Archaeologist, reams of it. And I also followed it up with the letter. Speaking of a reaming, I also sent along a letter expressing my displeasure in the IMA survey report that was published in 1993. And in no uncertain terms, I let Barb Mead down in Lansing and John Halsey know that they were full of baloney. And of course, the record would prove that, not my words, but the record that I was providing was, of course, going to provide that. 2002, the dike gets modified, the dam gets repaired. They let the water come all the way up, and I thought, well, that was it. I did my job. I'm good for the rest of my life. I expressed to them, I went out and I did my part, found these sites, and I expressed my dissatisfaction with the state archaeologists over the whole issue. No, I'll just let it rest. Well, greatest thing in the world happened to me in 2003, and the worst thing in the world happened to a lot of other people in 2003. And that is the brand new fuse plug that they just put in 2002 gave away. And it washed out and drained the entire basin. No one expected it. And this is a picture of me taken in 2003. And you might recognize, I don't know if you can or if you can remember where you've seen this before, but that's when my brother painted that painting of me that you saw in the beginning of my photo, or excuse me, beginning of my presentation. He took that painting depiction of me from this particular photo when I was up there and we walked onto the basin as it was still draining, and I was pointing out, there's a site over there, and there's a site over there, and there's a site over there, and I was all excited. And because I knew that it was going to be years before they were going to get up there and rebuild that and refill that dam. And so I knew that I had years to continue on with our project, in which we did. And that's what happened. That's the basin. If you look, obviously, this is on a flyover. I was with a good friend of mine, Ray Brown, who was a pilot, and he volunteered to take me up one day and just do flyovers of the whole basin area. That's the original lake. That's what it would look like back when people were living there. Although there is an ancient shoreline that you can actually see in here. So we think that at some point in time, and it's real distinctive, it's hard to pick out in this photo, but it's real easy, it's real discernible when you're there on site. But there was another shoreline that went here, so at one time that lake level actually encompassed all of this area as well. But at least the shoreline in historic times, that was the size of the lake, and so it drained it. And what happened was, of course, it exposed where areas that we had never been before, which was the entire Dead River shoreline. This is the Dead River as it's coming in right here. And of course, it exposed all of these areas in here. And so we were on it. And from 2003 to 2011, I revisited every single site that I had previously been to. And I reported detailed, updated site information down to John Halsey in Lansing once again. And I just kept on it. I just was nuts about it, I guess, more than anything. At least my wife thinks I was nuts about it, and she'll tell you that to this day. But anyway, and I did. I carefully documented the discovery of hundreds of newly surfaced cultural artifacts, including many diagnostic Paleo-Indian and early archaic projectile points. And again, you can see these are just some of the photos that I was taking as I was taking GPS waypoints of those. Not only sending down the GPS waypoints and the documentation, but also these photos were heading down to Lansing. Here again, you can see some really amazing early and late Paleo-Indian tool types made from exotic silicified sandstones. Including Hickston, from Wisconsin, that were showing up on these sites. I also was able to document, and this is kind of interesting because there's not supposed to be any more sites up there according to the IMA report, but I was able to document 27 additional archaeological sites up on that basin. It was amazing. And this is a surface collection from just one of those sites. And it's not what I'm going to talk about, but you can tell by the diagnostics that are here. These are Galena. This is made from Galena chert from Wisconsin. You can see Hickston, and you can see some local quartzites and other materials in there. But again, this is an early archaic site that had weathered out. And these artifacts didn't come from a single day of visiting that site. It came from 100 days of visiting those sites. Because every time it rained and every time the wind blew, I went back up there, and I begged other archaeologists to get up there to do something on a professional level to some of these sites. And it fell on deaf ears for a lot of good reasons and probably some bad reasons. So it became strictly up to me just to do the surface collection and document where these items were coming from. And so I did the very best that I could to do that, knowing that if I didn't do it, they were just going to be destroyed anyway, based upon what we knew that UPCO was going to do. But I did get the help of this guy, Dr. John Anderton, in 2003. This is a great picture of John because he found this incredible, very large trihedral adze made from rhyolite that was sitting on that same site. In fact, it was sitting on the Volkers Creek site. It wasn't in the previous photo. And of course, he was pretty excited about finding that. And the reason John was up there with me that day and all that summer was because one of the things that John did was that he mapped all 30 of the then known archaeological sites up until 2003. He made maps of every single site up there. We spent days up there mapping these sites. And of course, John felt that was an extremely important part of the archaeological survey project, and he was right on. And John brought his skills as a map maker, as a geoarchaeologist, and he teaches in the geography department at Northern. Of course, John passed away unexpectedly here a couple of years ago. But John was just a noted professor and a very, very good geoarchaeologist, and so it was glad that he was able to participate with me on this. Also, in 2004, while I was still up on the site, I got some help from a couple other people. Marla Buckmaster, who you can see here, was able to visit the sites with me on a couple of occasions. That being Marla, and this guy right here is Dylan Carr. And Dylan was visited the site, was up on the lake several times with me. Dylan's originally from North Lake, Ishpeming area, and he had come home to visit, and he would leave, and he was going about his schooling and his business as an archaeologist. But he returned home, and every time he returned home, he'd call me and say, "Let's go to Silver Lake." So we'd head up to Silver Lake. And what they're doing here was this project was very simple. They're only up there for a day. But what Marla and John and Dylan wanted to do on this particular day was just to put in just a couple. In fact, they only did two. They put in two small, just real shallow units, and they were trying to determine whether there were, in fact, undisturbed cultural deposits on the lake. And in this one up here, which was farther up on the basin, this one here, we didn't see anything that was basically undisturbed. It looked like it was a disturbed context. But lo and behold, here they actually came upon a hearth, and it was an intact hearth. and it was an intact hearth, okay? And they were able to document that. But then what happened then was Marla and Dylan got together, and they presented a paper at the Joint Midwest and Southeast Archaeological Conference down in St. Louis in 2004, and they presented a paper entitled After the Flood, Exploring the Late Pleistocene, Early Holocene in the Upper Great Lakes. And what they did was they looked at the raw materials from the site. And that was one of the things that, of course, Christopher was talking about, Dylan Carr being an expert on identifying, and through his hard work and dedication, identifying the deposits of the orthoquartzites down in Wisconsin. And so Dylan brought that expertise to this study, and he and Marla sat down with, which at that point was about 2,000 artifacts, and that includes flakes, debris and such. And they went through all of it, and they sorted it out as to what the raw material was. And that was the part of their paper. But if you've ever given a paper at this conference, you got 15 minutes. So so your paper is 15 minutes of fame. So you're going blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot more work to it and a lot more detail to it than what's presented in the paper. But one of the things that they took particularly care to do, even though they only had 15 minutes of fame, to present all of the information that they had worked so hard on, they used a page and a half to go after the UPCO and the IMA report, and they went after it, and they just talked over and over again about how it was a failed report, and it was basically ridiculous for the state of Michigan to accept that report based upon what's actually on that lake. And one of the things that they wrote, the only quote I'm going to say in here, it says, "We believe two factors contributed to the failed results of the 1993 IMA survey. First, water levels in the basin were higher than they were in 1987 and 1988. More depressing, however, was the field crew untrained in Upper Great Lakes archaeology and unfamiliar with local raw material that they failed to recognize, that being quartzite." And so they presented that at the Midwest Conference, and they took their shot at it too. And as you're going to see, they might as well have wrote that on toilet paper as well, because in the end it doesn't matter. And but anyway, I want to talk about two more sites, and then we're going to be done here. And these are site locales, because I could talk about all 50 sites, but I want to just focus in closing here on two of what, if I had to say, okay, what are the most important sites there? Well, it'd be hard to define that. But there's two locations in particular that haven't been reported on yet. The artifacts still have to be analyzed, the reports still have to be made, but these are hotties. And one up here is called the Silver Lake 9 locale, and that sits right on the outlet. This sits right in here, okay? It's on the bank, it's on the east bank of the outlet area of this lake. This is Sandpoint 2, and this sits farther up. This is up in the floodplain of the Dead River. But again, as I was telling you, it may have been when people were living here along this sand spit here, this sand area here, where the sites are. The lake might have been up here at this high level, okay? Because that you can still see that shoreline there, but we haven't dated the shoreline. But anyway, that's where those sites sit. This is during the flyover. I just wanted to show you that this again is Silver Lake number 9 locale. It consists of 3 separate activity areas. All 3 activity areas, which are very close to each other, as you can see here in this photograph, they both sit on a little bit of highland, on the highest little levels that you can see along the outlet here. They're definitely related to each other. They all produced Scottsbluff Cody diagnostic artifacts. And in fact, and of course, you can see that there was 5 projectile points that were found just in that area. And of course, there was one Thebes point, a broken Thebes point. And again, we've already established that Thebes points were being used here in the UP at the same time that Scottsbluff Eden were, and they were actually again found together at the Gordo site. So that wouldn't be at all surprising. It just set us confirmation of the age of what these sites, of the sites that we're going to talk about. This is what Area C looked like in 2003 after the basin drained. And this was a lower area of the site that we hadn't been able to walk on before. And you can see it is pretty well eroded to a large extent, because of wave action on this west end of the lake. It's on the east side, but it's on the it's on the east end of the lake where the west winds really do a lot of damage. You can see one of the old pine stumps that's sitting down there. But where this is right here, you can see right there actually isn't a rock. That's my GPS unit. And what I'm doing is I'm marking with a GPS that. And what that is that. And it's just an incredible artifact. And here you can see me photographing it. Actually, Randy took a picture of me taking that photograph. So that's actually what that is. And because Randy Champion was with me at the time, I should mention that. He was in the photo. And what that is it's the blade section made from Hickston silicified sandstone off of a Scottsbluff point. And what happened was, as you can see here, the blade had snapped free, had snapped off of the base. The base would have been, obviously down in this area down in here. And when that snapped off, you can still see part of the ears of the shoulder of the point are still evident. But what they did was they refurbished it. Silver Mound is a long ways away from Silver Lake, and you'll see this time and time again, where if a spear point broke, they just didn't throw away, for the most part, they didn't throw away the pieces. They kept them, and they were able to refurbish them into tools. And that's what you can see what they did here. And they refurbished this broken blade section of a spear point. They actually reground the sides here. So it was hafted into something, and I don't know if they used it as a projectile point or as a knife or whatever, but again, they reused it. And then there was, on May 14th, 2004, Dylan Carr was in town again, and Dylan said, let's take a ride up to Silver Lake, and it was one of them crappy days. May 14th, it's not really summer, and it's not really spring a lot of times in the UP, and this was on one of them days that you can see me here. Wind was blowing out of the north, there was rain mixed with snow coming down. I showed up in long underwear, heavy boots, heavy coat, a rain suit, and a nice hat. Dylan shows up in a light jacket and light pants and in a t-shirt. And I'm thinking, this is gonna be a short trip. And to Dylan's credit, he never complained and he never quit. And we spent the whole day up there in that miserable weather, and I could see he was shivering, but he would never ever admit it. He would never say that he was cold. And it told me how tough he is. And I respected him. I respected him before that, but after this, I respected him 10 times more because of how tough he was that day. But anyway, he wanted to visit the Paleo Indian sites up on the lake, and so we went to the Silver Lake number 9 site, and as we're walking along the beach, I'm with Dylan, and I look down. I'm actually talking to him. He's on this side of me, and down as he's walking, he's looking forward. I looked just beyond him, and I see sticking out of the ground is this. And even though I was maybe about 15 feet away, but I could see that it was the base end of a Scottsbluff point. And at the time, the real funny part of this is that when we walked to there, I said, I'm going to leave all of my equipment in the truck. And I said, I'm not going to carry it to the site. He says, well, why aren't you going to carry it? What if we find something? I said, that's the point. I said, if I take everything, we won't find anything. I said, it's like going hunting with your hunting knife. I said, if you forget your knife, you're going to get something. And I said, if we don't take the equipment, I said, we're going to find something. And if I do take it, we're not going to find anything. But if I don't, we're going to find something. He just sort of laughed at me. And sure enough, I had to walk all the way back to the truck, get my camera, get the GPS unit, and while he was standing there, he's walking around. I got to tell you, this is really funny. He's walking around eyeballing this particular, this artifact right here. And as he walked around, I couldn't help but notice that he stepped on, this is his footprint, which I made sure I had to take a photograph of, was his footprint when he stepped on the blade section of Hickston silicified sandstone, the blade section of a point. And anyway, it'll make which is certainly turning into a long story, a little bit shorter. What we did was we obviously pulled that out of the ground after we documented the fact that it was there with GPS and with photographs, and it was obvious that they were part of the same point. And they were only about maybe 24 inches apart. So they're actually the distance apart was actually very close. And I don't want to just totally rip on Dylan because for stepping on that point, because I got to admit when I was there I didn't see it either until I got back and see this footprint. But anyway, there it is. And that's what it looked like when it was refit. And what it is it's an Eden point, which is a variation, a smaller variation, if you will, of a Scottsbluff point. Or they look exactly the same, but in one way. But the flaking pattern's a little bit different, and the base is a little bit smaller, and there's a difference to them that makes it that's enough to differentiate between Scottsbluff and Eden. But that's a resharpened Eden point, is what that is. And the amazing thing about it was it's remarkably similar, almost exactly the same as the Eden point that was found on Deer Lake, which again wasn't too far to the south of here. And this is the point right here from, this is an Eden point that was glued back together from the cache at Gordo. And this is the one that showed up at Silver Lake. And it's got the same base shape, it's got the same corner treatment. It even has there's like a little barb sticking off of this corner right here. This has that single barb, and this has more of a defined upper shoulder. It's like the same person made it. The same, it's like those little attributes are pretty hard to come by if it's two different people making that point. So that in itself, like, again, is one of the real exciting things. Like returned in 2004, again on May 25th, just 2 weeks after I was up there with Dylan. We returned to this site, and again, what we found was this. It was another blade section off of a Scottsbluff point. This was made from a non-local chert, and again, it's just the blade section. But again, what had happened was the blade section had snapped off of the base of this Scottsbluff point. You can see this beautiful collateral flaking, which is very typical of Paleo-Indian manufacturing of points. But they used it as a tool. The edges got more of a beveled edge to it. They were using it for cutting or for scraping or for something else. And again, this is not a material that was coming from the UP. That material and that artifact it came from home, if you will, in home being somewhere down in Wisconsin as they came up here to make their home at that particular day and time up on Silver Lake, undoubtedly when they were, we still think that they were probably chasing down caribou. So the artifacts, the reason the site's important is this, is that it appears to be a single component habitation site, base camp area if you will, but a single component habitation site for Scottsbluff, Eden, Cody complex, cultured people. And so when you look at all of these artifacts and you look at the diagnostics and you compare them and you look at everything, that's what's going to make this site very important. And I'm kind of really excited about reporting on that because it does certainly appear to be a single component site. Now the other site that's just as exciting and probably even more so to a lot of people is this last one I'm going to talk about. And it's up here, it's this one here called Sandpoint, the Sandpoint locale. And the Sandpoint locale, just like the Silver Lake 9 locale, comprises of 3 different activity areas. And this is areas of artifact concentrations. So we define it as activity areas, but there's artifacts here, a large area here of a dense concentration in here. And, but what we believe that we got here is a single component, if you will, or early component anyway, of a very early group of people coming to this lake, and we think that it's the earliest, and I'll tell you why here. This is Area A, and this is taken in 2004, and this is a year after the basin had drained, and so there was a lot of erosion occurring. And the other thing that we had going against us wasn't just erosion that was occurring from wind and rain and snow and ice and everything else that was happening, but the other problem we had was this: ORVs everywhere. And especially when you get onto these highlands where these sites were located, and this one being this nice sandy area, that had remained relatively intact. It was just a magnet for people with ORVs, with side-by-sides, to come up there and spin around in circles. And you can see her, they're spinning. And they kept doing it. Whoever it was would go up there and they'd spin around. But when they would spin around, they would spin out artifacts. Okay? And this is a site that I visited over and over and over again. I don't even know, I couldn't even begin to count how many times I walked up the lake, because I had to walk up there, and this is a long ways up that lake, but I knew how important this site was, and I continually went to it. This is in 2005 when I visited the site. You can see what it looked like then. That's what it looked like in 2008, and you can see trees are starting to come up, the basin is starting to grow in, and in 2008, that's when UPCO was beginning to, again, relicense to refill the dam and to have all of their dikes and that okayed, by FERC. And but it was also the same time that another archaeologist helped me on the site. His name is Luke Litwinianic, and Luke is from originally he's a Canadian. He's from Montreal, and he teaches out right now. He's an archaeologist out at Sacred Heart University out in Connecticut. And the reason I got to meet him and know him is because his wife's from Marquette. And so, Luke would periodically come back to visit his wife's mom and stay with her for several weeks in Marquette. And of course, we really hit it off. And he was a Paleo-Indian archaeologist. And he'd done most of his work with early Paleo-Indian artifacts on the East Coast, and then some also down in Texas and in the West. And so he was really interested in this particular site, because when he looked at all of the material from Silver Lake, but the artifacts from this site caught his attention. And he said, this isn't late Paleo, this is early Paleo-Indian material. He said, these are classic early Paleo-Indian tool types. And so, and he was convinced of that, and in fact, he talked about it in his paper, and he wrote it, he presented this particular paper here, called Foreign to Familiar Landscapes, Paleo-Indian Occupation along the Glacial Front in Marquette County, Michigan, and that was at the SAA up in Vancouver, Canada. And in that paper, one of the things that he talked about, and this is just the cover sheet, I'm not going to, that wasn't there to read it, but that was just the cover sheet from his paper that he read that he gave to me. But here's what he said. He said that those three sites up in Sandpoint 2 were probably 12,500 to 12,000 years old, that they were Paleo-Indian in age, that they weren't late Paleo. Those things were the real deal. Those were the first people. And he wrote about that, and he expressed his argument, presented his argument in his paper. Well, you'd think things were going great, eh? Well, here's what happens. In the meantime, UPCO Wisconsin Electric is going for it once again because they want to refill now their new dike systems. And of course, they have to go through the proper channels. And at that time, unbeknownst, I guess, to UPCO and to others, I was also working, I was a cultural resource specialist consultant for the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. And of course, and Summer Cohen at the time, who was the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer up at KBIC, she was very, very interested in what the things we were finding on Silver Lake. In fact, she visited Silver Lake with me on numerous occasions to come up and to visit these sites, which to her were sacred sites, and which they were to me too. And so, in fact, I brought her mom, and her daughter, and everybody else up to that lake, and they were like in magic land when they got there to actually stand on these sites that were so old and that belonged to their ancestors. Well, anyway, I talked to Summer about it, and I said, oh boy, I said, they're going to make their move again. And so she contacted the State Historic Preservation Officer down in Lansing and said, not so fast on it this time. They need to do a survey up there. They need to go up there and evaluate these sites, and once and for all determine what's up there, and let's be honest about it. And so UPCO in Wisconsin Electric said, okay, well, then that's what we're going to do. And that's what they did. And so I'm not going to mention the guy's name, who was the principal investigator, but it was Al Van Dyke. And in his report, he went up there and he did phase 1 and phase 2 archaeological survey. And they were up there a long time. And when it was all said and done, and this guy hated my guts, because I went up there twice to visit him, and this guy didn't even try to hide it. I mean, you could tell when someone might not like you but fakes it. He hated me, and I never even knew the guy, but I could tell, and he probably had good reason too, because of the work that we had done that really conflicted with earlier work that they had done. And in his report, he finally issued a final report. Here's what he says. He says, Van Dyke, well, first of all, he wholly supported and quoted over and over again the findings of the failed IAM 1993 survey report. He just kept going back to that and talking about how that was, here's what they found then, and it's the truth. And then when he concluded, he actually wrote these words, which I find hard to believe to this day. He said, artifact locations on Silver Lake do not represent undisturbed activity of Native Americans. People did not necessarily live and carry out daily activities at these locations. We cannot determine where the artifacts came from. And I wanted to fall right off the kitchen chair when I read that. And as a result of his report, it was okayed once again by John Halsey down in Lansing, and once again by our State Historic Preservation Office, and they were given the green light to go ahead and do whatever it was. They determined it was determined by our SHPO down in Lansing that no further professional archaeological work or site preservation is deemed necessary on the Silver Lake Basin. To me, it's a crime. It's an absolute crime what happened up there. And as a result of this, the dam was ordered closed, and everything was refilled, and it was actually going to be at a different water level that was going to affect a lot of the sites. They're going to be a little bit water level than normal, which was going to be right in the center of a lot of these sites that were below the old water level. I didn't give up. I just kept going back and forth to the sites. I spent couple of years documenting the damage that was occurring. I was up there day after day after day with my cameras, taking pictures of sites being destroyed, sites that we had worked so hard to try to preserve and to study. I took pictures of how much erosion had occurred up there. And here you can see, just because, really nobody went up there and did anything in all them years, except I went up there and surface collected and did the things that I did. This is just a great example of how much wind-blown activity took place up on Sandpoint 2. that when I first got there, that sand levels that were covering the surface of that site were up above this deposit right here. And you can see just from the wind blowing that this buried deposit of hard soil was now sitting up there like a little monument. And I put my hat next to it and took a photo of it and then went over to the site and cried. This was a great photo of the site in 2010. The reason it's a great photo is because I got a great gift that day for all my hard work, and it was really the greatest gift that I got by visiting this site over and over and over again. You might be able to see it right there. It's an eagle feather. It had dropped right onto that site, and when I got there, I took a picture of the eagle feather with my spear. And I ain't gonna tell you the story why I carry a spear up there. That's another story, but it's a good one. We'll talk about that another day. But anyway, that's what it was in 2010, but by then it was being refilled. The basin was being refilled. Here's what it looked like in 2011 when the water had already come up, washed over part of it. That site was destroyed. It was wiped right out by wave action. And so at that point, the chances of finding any intact archaeological deposits on that particular very early site are gone. Now, what tells us that it's early? Well, go through a couple more slides here and then we'll get out of here, is the artifacts. And again, I visited this site dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And these are just some of the documentation photos I took of the surface collections. And here you can see most of these are all non-local exotic cherts and silicified sandstones. Almost all this material has been identified as various materials that are coming from Wisconsin and from Minnesota, not from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Here you can see a lot of it, of course, is you're going to find a lot of Hickston was on the site. And one of the things when they say that, well, there's no undisturbed artifacts in any context on these sites. All of those resharpening flakes that you see right there, all of those resharpening flakes were from one little spot. And I went up there, every time I'd revisit that site, there'd be one more of those flakes showing up in that one spot. And I marked it with a peg in the ground. And every time I'd go back to that peg, and then there'd be 2 pieces, and then there'd be 3. It was pieces that small that were being blown out, what does that tell you? Is that an undisturbed site or is that disturbed? And it was all in an area about the size of this. So it was, but it's gone now. But I was able to recover all of those resharpening flakes where somebody 11, 12,000 years ago sat there and resharpened a spear point. They resharpened and put a blade back on a spear point and they took those flakes off. The largest artifacts we found, everything was relatively small or medium in size, I guess, but there was 2 pieces of some exotic type material, and I haven't identified it yet, and someone will. But again, it's like a siltstone, a real fine grained, hard siltstone, and these 2 bifaces that obviously came from a quarried site, because you can tell by if you see this flat surface, it did come off of a big chunk of rock. That came from a quarried site somewhere. But they were carried to the site, and they were left there, and they were laying together. They exposed themselves out, laying exactly together. And this is the assemblage of artifacts that really lit up Luke's eyes when he looked at this, because these are the formal tools, besides all of the flakes that were coming off of one of the areas, off of Area A, that told him that you're into something special here, you're into early Paleo-Indian. And of course, that has to do with oops, I'm going to do that again. Hang on here. Go back to that. Oops. I'll get this right one of these times. It has to do with these overshot flake blade tools that you see here. It has to do with the flaking patterns that show up. This classic Paleo-Indian flaking patterns that show up on these ultra thin bifaces, both here and here. You got jasper taconite, which isn't coming from the UP. That's probably coming from the deposits from Minnesota. The other materials that you'll see here, of course, are Hickston. And of course, the most important artifacts, well, if you're trying to determine the age of this site from a diagnostic standpoint, are these. And one of the things that showed up was 3 miniature Paleo-Indian points. These things are tiny. They're like an inch long, an inch and a half long, okay? And in fact, they're all found in pieces. They had been either ceremonial, it's true, a ceremony they were broke, or maybe they were broke when they were being made, but they seem to indicate by the snap on them that somebody made them and then intentionally broke them, probably as part of a ceremony. And that's not unheard of. That's actually something that's been recorded before on Paleo-Indian sites. One of the points, the projectile points, even though they're tiny, the other thing that Dylan Carr looked at these, and both he and Luke both agreed that the only way that you could make them is to make them on a channel flake, that these are actual artifacts that are made on a channel flake. And a channel flake is that flute flake that you take off of a fluted point, okay? And a channel flake itself will tell you, just that you don't have to find the whole projectile point, but if you find an actual channel flake, that tells you you're on an early Paleo-Indian site, okay? Where they're making fluted points. And even though we don't find a fluted point here on this particular site, the two people who are experts on this both agree that those are early, that those are miniature projectile points made from those types of flakes. The one point, however, there is one, and I searched, I went up to that site. This is probably one of my last trips up to that lake site. I think this occurred in 2011, right at the tail end of when I was ready to just quit. And I found pretty much what I was looking for. It's the base burnt portion, and it's all burnt, and there's very little of it to even tell you what it is, but there's certainly enough to tell you what it is. It's a non-fluted point, but even though there's this big, long, you can see this thinning flake here, that at first we thought might be a fluted, it might be a flake that's basically going to make this a fluted point, but we don't think it is. We think what it is it's a plain view type point. Very, very early, it's a sort of a transitional point from that you'll see from fluting points to say to agate basin in a sense.